Jay Kensinger, who I have to say he's aged very well, because if you think about what Jay looks like in the chronology protection case, that was
Almost 20 years ago.
yeah. So maybe there is something to this time travel thing. Jay maybe he traveled like 20 years into the future just to do this video.
So, no, I see. I can't do handstands anymore. Backwards handstands, and you realize you start getting to like 30, great, 40, okay, 50. Whoa! Then things start hurting that you've never seen, that you've never felt before. But it's you still have a good time.
Yeah, well, think of that as like a motivation. There are some artists who think the best art comes from pain. Although personally, I never agreed with that. But there are a lot of wise views on that. In any case, go ahead. What were we going to say, Jay?
It's interesting you say that. One of my sort of bugbears is a lot of directors these days, even some of my favorite ones, they seem to have challenges with expressing a realistic depiction of joy. And things are so dark now, and that's great, that you're exposing a lot of injustices in the world, but there's still contrasting is always really good. And so yeah, I just read this, some great films are just so dark, but sometimes you need, if you're going to do something dark, you need something like bright to sort of contrast it and stuff. So yeah, so I think joy is there's a power to that a lot of directors could do more with it.
Yeah, no, I agree completely. And as a matter of fact, to get back to the subject of Jay's movie and my story, which, as the class knows, was first published in Analog Magazine, the then editor of Analog Magazine, Stanley Schmidt, used to always say that not that he wanted a story with a happy ending, but he wanted a story in which the protagonist at least had a fighting chance to get on top of it. And as a matter of fact, as I told the class on Tuesday, and I don't know if Jay and I ever discussed this, in my very first draft of the chronology protection case, which I sent to Stan Schmidt, it was about 5,000 words, so it was a short story. It wasn't even a novelette. I had Phil dying. And you see that in the movie when Phil goes over the bridge or whatever it is on the side of that big embankment and drowns in the water. And Stan writes back to me and says, look, I really enjoyed the story. I think you have a great character. Why are you killing him?
Yeah, you
So,
never kill off the protagonist.
yeah, I know. But I was young and impressionable, and I, didn't know that much back then. But
You don't,
go
yeah,
ahead.
you don't director's cut your first great character. In director's cut, everyone always dies and saw it darker, and so yeah.
No, that's a very good point. So that's probably one of the reasons that Jay and I were on the same wavelength. We both appreciate not just bland, saccharine, happy endings, but at least some joy in the world. In contrast to what you do see, I think, in a lot of both stories that you read and things you see on the screen. By the way, if any of you have any questions, you don't need to wait until the end. You can just put up a yellow hand and Jay or I will answer the question. Anyway, where I left this with the class was I told the class how I came up with the idea for the chronology protection case. It came from Stephen Hawking and his chronology protection conjecture, which is a real scientific theory. Not really provable because no one has tried to time travel yet, as far as we know. But you can't get any better than Hawking as far as a serious, hard scientific theorist. Hard being not difficult to understand, but rather hard being sticking to the laws of physics and quantum mechanics and what we know. So that's how I got the idea. Analog published a story in 1995, September 1995. It got some good reviews. As I told you, it was nominated for a Nebula Award, didn't win. Was reprinted a couple of times. And then one day, Now, actually, Jay, I can't remember whether you called me or I received something in the mail from you, but why don't I turn the story over to you now, and you
Okay.
can tell us how you came to know this story, what attracted you to it, what you didn't like about it, etc.
Yeah, well, I've always been a fan of short stories because they usually convey, amazing ideas without having to go through like 600 pages. And so, I was a young filmmaker, and I've made a bunch of like short films, silly films, and I realized that I really should make an actual narrative, something that like has a beginning, a middle, and an end. But I really wanted the story to be good, so I definitely couldn't write it myself at the moment, and so so I would want like a really good story. And so reading all these like wonderful short stories, and I came across Paul's story, this amazing story was sort of mind blowing, and it had these themes that I really enjoy. One of my favorite themes is to have ordinary people confronting a situation that's completely extraordinary, something that sort of bends the entire reality of how they perceive things to be. And not only that, how they deal with that. Basically, the competence of them trying to sort of wrap their head around the new reality and try and fix something or find a solution. And to me, that's a big theme that I've always looked for in stories. And I love Paul Levinson's story. And there were, I guess, there were four things about his story that really sort of struck me. The first one was what I just said, the ordinary versus extraordinary, people confronting these mind expanding, things. The second is just, the competence, the fact that people are trying to figure out problems. They're figure out solutions to these problems. And that's something that really appealed to me. The other thing that was in the story that you don't see in a lot of stories was it was sort of a very bold thing. He sort of flipped the idea of scientific pursuit as always good. And one of the great things about science is it criticizes itself. And you've all, I assume right now, read the story, seen the film, and I can't spoil anything, I assume. Yeah, so basically the story ends with abandoning the scientific pursuit of knowledge for the greater good. And it shows a different priority than a lot of other science fiction stories, science criticizing itself. It's another positive quality of what I think the scientific method is. And so, yeah, and the final thing was it was filmable. Something where like it was one person meeting a bunch of other people. There wasn't a car chase. There was a car crash, but filming it inside the car and doing a little bunch of green screen visual effects. That was sort of fun to learn how to do. Every time from then on, every time I made a film, I put in something I don't know how to do, and so that was my first attempt at doing something, some sort of visual effects sort of thing. And so basically it was a lot of talking, a lot of philosophy, a lot of dialogue. It's something I actually film with a micro budget or hardly any budget. And it explored everything about what I wanted to do to make a film. So so I made it, and it was great. It was just, I got a bunch of friends together. We had the greatest time. People have the most amazing times on film sets, because it's just so fun because you're creating this new reality, and it's like this amazing group effort. And so I decided after I made it, I showed it to a bunch of friends. We had some parties and showed it, and like, well, I should probably send this to Paul, so I can get sued or something like that. And so I sent him the tape. I sent, at that, everything was on a tape. Everything's like, filmed in sort of analog video, which actually I think in some ways is superior to like the later digital video, because of the fact that when you convert it digitally, it's actually, you get this richness to it. But anyway, so I sent it to him saying, hey, look, I made this film from your amazing story. I have no plans to market it or make money off of it. Obviously, it's your story. But if you want to sue me, here's all the evidence. So what I did is I just threw myself, at his mercy, and anything could have happened. And what happened is he read it. He called me back and said, hey, yeah, this is pretty, I like this. Let's see what we can do with it. And then from then on, a lot of really sort of cool things happened, which involved, awards and festivals and conventions and stuff. And so that was the general story. And, then I've known Paul now for about 20 years, and and then things have changed. We got on Amazon Prime or Amazon. Now it's on Amazon Prime, and just we made changes to it. We changed the ending, did a little 10 years later thing, which was really sort of fun to film 10 years later. But anyway, that's a general reason I used Paul's story.
Yeah, let me say the one thing that I disagreed with when Jay called me, I liked everything he said, except when he said, I have no plans to market it. Because
Yeah,
that's like totally alien to my philosophy. I think you
yeah.
should market the hell out of anything
Mm.
that you
It's,
create.
yeah, especially if some guy calling from California,
Yeah, that's absolutely right. But
Hollywood.
but that should be actually a good lesson to you, the students, because I think that there is, and I don't know how it arose, but there is, to some extent, like a pervasive sense of that people should have modesty about their creations. And I'm not saying people should be arrogant about them, but if you're modest to the point where you don't even want to market it. I remember we were talking the other day
Mhm.
about this little voice in your head that says to you, hey, this is really a terrible piece of work, don't do anything more with it. I always think it's best to ignore that and try to do something more with it. Let me ask you just one other question, just for the sake of the official record, whatever exactly that might be.
Mhm.
Um, and let me know if I'm right or wrong about this. For some reason, I have the impression that you first actually laid eyes on the story in Jack Dan's Nebula Award volume, or did you see the story someplace else?
I can't. Wow, it's been so long ago. I can't remember whether it was in one of that was in um, one the best sci-fi of the year yeah, it could have been like those short stories that by was it Hartnell or the I forget
Hartwell, yeah, David
yeah, Hartwell,
Hartwell.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So that's one of my favorite series by Hartwell, but it might have been in there. It might I also read the Nebula award-winning story, so it might have been in there as well. I actually can't remember it. In fact, it's so long ago that when I decided to read it again, I couldn't find the story. So I had to look it up. I'm like, okay, it's no, the Mammoth Book of Time Travel. Well, let me get that book. And then I read it there. And so it's interesting. Yeah, interesting to read that story again I haven't read it for so long. But yeah, I can't remember exactly what it is, but it was one of those anthologies, which is great that where they use like the best of the best, and they take the thousands of short stories written and just and some editor reads all of them and then just compiles it into sort of like a nice like what they believe to be the best stories of that year wasn't, and I think that's how I read it.
Yeah, and the truth of the matter is, and this is, I think, one of the most wonderful things about creating anything, and it almost sounds like a cliche, but that's because it's so true. Whenever you create something, and as long as you put it out there into the world. So here I am on Cape Cod. I'm looking out at Cape Cod Bay. So I'm thinking about water. So, I mean, imagine like, a message in a bottle that you throw off a ship. It just goes out there. You never know where it's going to land. You never know who's going to read it. If it's a movie, who's going to see it. And the key point of demarcation is getting it not only from out of your head onto a screen, onto a piece of paper, but getting that screen or piece of paper into the hands of somebody who can push it out into the world so it no longer even has a direct connection to you. In other words, you're listed as the author, but that work is out there. And so, Jay's coming upon this, it was like totally unpredictable to me. How could it be? But it was a really profound vindication of what I already thought. And and this gets back to something I also talk a lot about, and we haven't talked that much about it here in this class, and probably we'll get a chance to talk about it later on. But, apropos of Amazon Prime, one of the things that Amazon did in 2007 is introduce the Kindle, which originally was designed and it was created to make it easier for people to obtain and read things. Because, in other words, rather than going out to a bookstore, rather than Amazon having to ship a book to you through the mail, the best that'll happen is it'll get there overnight. What Jeff Bezos was thinking of in the build up to the Kindle up until 2007 is you can basically get it instantly. And so in a way, what Amazon also did is they have made it much easier for authors to get their works out there. Put them out into that sea, and who knows where the tides will carry them. And so, for all of you who've yet to publish anything, and I know some of you are working on writing your own material, you should always keep that in the back of your mind. It's never been easier, really, to get your work out there. And before the Kindle, there were all these tragic stories of great works which never got out there. And I always cite Thomas Gray's poem from the middle of the 1700s, Elegy in a Country Churchyard. Many a gem was born to blush unseen. Uh, that's really, something that's very profound, because why is it born to blush unseen in that poem? Because they're in the dark, unfathomed caves of oceans where no one can see them. And then the poem goes on, many a flower waste its sweetness on the desert air. And that's a profound thing. A beautiful flower blooms, but there's no one in a barren desert to see it or smell its perfume. And so in a sense, it's wasted. And so I was lucky that Jay found my story. I was lucky that Stan Schmidt decided to publish it in the first place. But the good news for everyone now is you don't even need someone to publish it in the first place. You can publish it yourself. Um, Jay, tell us a little bit, though. Obviously, I'm immensely gratified, and I still am, that you had such high views of the story. But as the class now knows, having seen the movie and read the story, Jay did not just translate every single word of every single character from the story to the movie that he made. And right there and then you have the profound difference, from page to screen. It rarely is, if it ever is, exactly the same. J.K. Rowling, by the way, is someone who felt so strongly that she wanted her words exactly as she wrote them to be in the movie, that she really ran a very, very tight ship in terms literally of her contract with the people who made the movie, and the fact that she was in effect a producer. Peter Jackson, on the other hand, with Lord of the Rings, he didn't have to worry about Tolkien's liking it or not, because Tolkien was no longer with us by the time that Peter Jackson did his story. So, Jay, you read the story, you loved it. What happened next?
Yeah, yeah. So I did read it, and I do want to say that yes, there are some parts in the film that are complete, copyings of what you've actually written. So there are blocks of dialogue like that. But what's interesting, converting a short story to a screenplay. What I found out is there are three things that sort of that are important, things you realize when you actually take a story which has the internal narrative and turn it into an audiovisual medium, which conveys information a lot quicker and a lot sort of, at you really quickly. First of all, the flow of time is different. It's really for a story that you read and a film that you see. And it's interesting. It's sort of the best analogy is sort of Einstein's relativistic view of time, where time moves differently for different people. In a short story, sometimes things in a novel go too quick. And the film conversion, sometimes you have to pad things to seem realistic. An example is at the very beginning when Lauren Goldring had to convince Phil D'Amato to take her case. In the book, it's basically, the dialogue's really quick. This isn't my department. Nobody need help. Yeah, okay, I'll do it. And so what I realized is that when I was writing this down, that seems really, really quick. In the book, it works perfectly because it's a short story. But in the film, I realized that there has to be some sort of motivation, a greater urgency. I sort of extended the dialogue out. I said, well, no, this is not my department. No, really, I made it sort of an argument where Lauren had to finally desperately say, like, I'm a physicist. My husband is a physicist too, and that sort of like convinced Phil D'Amato to take the case. And so sometimes things are going to be spread out. At the same time, sometimes things are going to be compressed. When you read a story, Later when Lauren Goldring's being interviewed, there's description things like the plush chair that Phil D'Amato sits in, the red eyes, or the allergy. Those are things that you don't have to extend. You just have to just show them. And so there's some things that go long, some things that go short. And so the flow of time, it's very different. And so just always being aware of that, always being aware of what works and what seems to what seems to actually be, first of all, motivationally consistent, and also just work with the flow of the story. That's something that you first of all write down, film, and then re-edit. What's great about making a film is you sort of do it 3 times. You write the screenplay, you direct it, and then you edit it. And at that time, you sort of get to compress things or expand things and sort of make the flow better. But that's something you got to be aware of when you ever convert a story, an actual novel or short story, novella, to an actual film. That's the first thing. The second thing, which I think is even more important, more interesting, is that especially in mysteries, things where you want to convey suspense, you don't want people to understand what's going on, information sometimes needs to be postponed for suspense or surprise. Now, the mental work of reading versus the audiovisual infodumps, it's very different. But when you read something, sometimes I read things, I have to sort of read a passage again to sort of get all the images. With films, it's just an audiovisual dump. It's just right in your head. You don't really have to think that much to see a film, more than you have to if you're actually reading. In film information, it feeds 2 senses: your eyes, your ears, and they sort of reinforce each other. It's sort of like getting 2 examples of a math problem, like, solve it this way, and you can also solve it this way, and then you really, really know how to solve it. And so basically, for reading, you have to do more analysis and mental work, things like that. So, and sometimes information gets conveyed too easily, where in a film, if you've got the exact same information, you immediately figure it out. And an example is there's a place in the book where Lauren Goldring's being interviewed, and Phil D'Amato talks about JFK, like the paradox of JFK. Like, well, if you kill him, things will be different. And I realized that when I was reading this, and I actually wrote the dialogue and the screenplay, and I read the screenplay, oh, people are going to figure out, yeah, the universe is killing people. Well, I can't have that like in the first 10 minutes of the story. I have to put it later. So we put actually later with Jack Donovan, the news guy. He was the one that actually did the dialogue, and Edmund Hunt, my friend, who's this amazing person, and he improvised a lot of it. I wrote the dialogue, and it sort of just riffed on the fact that there's a plane crash, and then you stop the plane crash, but then you were never there to stop the plane crash. That sort of paradox. The paradox came later because the fact that I need people to sort of figure out. I need people to sort of take more time to figure out what was going on, because if you convey too much information in the beginning, by just translating the novel over, or the story over, you'll find that it's too easy to figure out what's happening, especially if you're doing a mystery, especially if you're having suspense, if you want people to not figure out anything until the very, very end, or actually figure it out themselves. So that's a big thing. And then the other thing is internal dialogue has to be sort of conveyed differently. Filming thoughts, they've always been a challenge. In this novelette, Phil talks to himself a lot. And okay, well, how am I going to put that in the screen now? So I did, one of the ways I cheated was had Phil have a recorder to say all his thoughts. And so that was, during the climactic end of Act 2 with the car crash, he's thinking all these things in his head in the story, and then there's a car crash. And well, I can't have him just say stuff out loud. It'd be sort of weird. So I realized, oh, well, he's a coroner. He probably records a bunch of things. So that's why I had the recording device throughout the entire film, and actually worked. That was actually, I think, a pretty good solution about what's happening. Examples of doing it a different way. David Lynch's Dune. I don't know if you ever saw that film many years ago. The spice. Where everything, there's this weird thing about, if you want to have someone thinking, for some reason you need reverb in post-production that says, oh, this is a person's thoughts. And so much in Dune, there were just people like just thinking, and you just heard their thoughts, which is a cool idea, but it was just, not many people have done that, and it's because that might not have worked as well as trying different other different ways to convey sort of internal dialogue. So yeah, and like the heart attack scene, when Phil later realizes that none of the scientists will speak to him at all, and in the story there's simply a he's simply a quick line saying that maybe he should publish something, and that's it. And well, he can't think it out loud in the film, so well, I'm going to have an action. He's actually going to go to a computer. He's going to actually start writing to who it may concern. I have this really big issue that's going on, and so actually conveying that from the internal dialogue to actually an action, that's a big thing. I think that would actually helps to convey internal dialogue. And so yeah, so and then getting that heart attack. Yeah, those are the three things I sort of see that they're things that you're going to sort of find out when you convert a story to a film. And so yeah, so if anyone has any questions, those are the big three things.
Yeah, no, that's very good. We'll get to questions in a second. I just wanted to point out, by the way, you said early on in this response that in effect you see the movie that you make three times, and you will be happy or not to know that this is Aristotle's advice to teachers. Goes all the way back to Aristotle, who says when you're trying to teach someone or convey something, and obviously there were no movies back then, but Aristotle was aware of the Odyssey and the Iliad, and there were certainly, fictions of various sorts back then. And Aristotle said, well, you have to do it three times. First, you tell the person what you're going to teach them, then you teach them, and then you tell them what you just taught them. And that's the most effective way. There's something almost magical about the number three. So it's interesting that Jay, as a filmmaker, is using that same approach vis-a-vis his film. Um, and I think that Jay really touched on an essential point, because no matter how faithful, and I'd be interested too, there we can't get J.K. Rollins here, we can ask her this question, but maybe he's discussed it somewhere. What Jay has just said about a character thinking, which is easy enough to do when you're writing. So in other words, basically I'm writing Phil D'Amato. I could have him talking to someone, a colleague, a secretary, whatever, a potential villain, which he does in other cases, or I can have him thinking about things, which is actually very easy to do. And, Phil is one of these people who thinks all the time. He's on a train or, a plane or going somewhere. Not only is there a scene in which we see what Phil might see out of the train window, but we have Phil's stream of thoughts. And as Jay points out, that in itself makes it a necessity that the movie is going to have to be different than the page, that the screen is going to have to be different, because there's no way you can show that internal thinking. So I think Jay came up with an ingenious idea, talking into this everything in the movie is sort of low key, right? So it's like the worst recording device I've ever seen in my life. I don't know what it is, like a mini cassette or something the poor guy is using. Why, he's the coroner in Santa Cruz. For some reason, they cheap out on Phil D'Amato in terms of the equipment they give him to do his job. And so he's struggling with this little device. But that I thought was a good solution to the problem. Let's shift slightly to something else, which I'm very interested in also. And this is another way in which you changed a little bit of the story. And this is what led, actually, at least in my head, to want to do the new extended ending. In both the story and the film, we have Phil and Lauren being attracted to each other. She's not just someone he's helping in a case. He's feeling something towards her. He's consoling her. It's more than consoling. She's feeling something about him. By the way, just so you know, the class knows I've been criticized over the years for that why do you have to have your detective always fall in love, with women that he's dealing with? Well, he doesn't always fall in love, but sometimes he falls in love. Later, he gets married to one of the people in a completely different story and novel, a woman by the name of Jenna. and then he doesn't quite fall in love that often with other people. But anyway, so Lauren is the first major female character in both the short story and the movie. But of course, there's another character at the end, Jennifer Fenwick, right? Who is also a scientist. She, as you know, and again, they're going to be spoilers here because I'm assuming you've all read the story and seen the movie. She's the last surviving scientist working on the project. So she's Phil's last hope. And a significant difference, though, and I like, uh, I, I keep thinking Jay is Phil because I'm seeing like Phil D'Amato from the movie on the screen, but I have to keep thinking he's Jay, not Phil. In Jay's movie, near the end, both in the original and then, of course, it's extended, and I'll tell you about that in a few minutes, in the extended ending, not only do uh, Phil and Jennifer have this incredibly profound discussion in which it's all laid out, the pros and cons, what are they going to do about this? But Jay has them falling in love at the end of that scene where I don't think, I mean, maybe there's a slight implication in my story, but I try to refrain from having like a romantic ending because I thought it would be too schmaltzy or something. But maybe Jay can speak to why he thought that was the way to go.
Yes, yeah, I really Paul's a metaphor of two particles, any particles going away and coming together, as an analogy to the romance. I always thought was a really cool statement that actually put in the 10 years later scene. But yes, what I did is that again, we're talking about internal dialogue, and if there's some sort of like romantic attraction that was in the novel, it was conveyed very subtly, and I realized, well, we need to convey it a little bit better. So what I wrote at the very end and actually filmed was a scene where they would say, great, we're going to protect each other, it's wonderful, and they get a little closer, and then suddenly, without warning, they kiss each other, and they sort of look back and like, what was that? That was like ridiculous. And then they realize, wait a second, maybe the universe is trying to put it together to sort of protect the secret. And then Jennifer says, shut up, that's ridiculous, you're an idiot. But they get together anyway. But so yeah, so I actually added something a little more direct, and I think Paul, which I think his choice to say well, let's try something different, a little more subtle. I thought it was actually a really good choice. Where and doing it 10 years later is really, really cool. And so the fact that Paul wrote some dialogue later that actually would take place 10 years later, where the film just ends with them looking at each other, and then suddenly there's a cut to 10 years later, and they actually are together, and they're sort of like and they have this sort of bickering romantic sort of like more traditional sort of like 1940s dialogue going back and forth. And I think I like that a lot better than just the kiss. That seemed just that on hindsight, it seemed like, it was just a little bit too quick and too silly. And so so basically changing it that way, I think that was a much better way of conveying the two particles coming together like romantically, which is so actually what Phil actually says to Jennifer at the end, to annihilate each other, which is sort of how a lot of relationships sometimes work, the give and take of relationships. So yeah, so I think that worked out really well.
Let me say, by the way, one thing I'm a little aggravated about, but not that aggravated, not inconsolably aggravated, was I wanted to make that ending, the new extended ending, as realistic as possible. So I stuck in there that hey, if we get on the Chris Matthews show and talk about this, blah 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 blah, that hey, is cool. Well, Chris Matthews, and as some of you may know, Chris Matthews was pretty much forced to resign a little over a year ago because he had made more than one woman feel uncomfortable. Not that he assaulted her, but he said like stupid things like, why, someone who's a guest on his show, why aren't I falling in love with you? And, that kind of thing might work in a story, but it certainly is not an appropriate thing for, a news anchor to say to a guest. But So I wasn't happy about that for a variety of reasons. But one of the reasons was so now basically that makes our story and Jay's movie not only a sort of time travel science fiction movie, but if we think that we're watching it and it's taking place in the present in that last 10-minute scene, that's an alternate universe. Or it's like earlier than February 2020 or whenever it was that poor Chris Matthews had to leave.
Yeah, or yeah. Well, that's the thing. It took place in, like, 2010. I actually sort of like the fact that, this was in 2003 where we made this, and you see things like that, when you have to transfer someone. Oh, someone's online. Let me transfer over, and you see that sort of quick extended bit of, like, of Helen, Secretary, basically pressing a whole bunch of buttons, and then me having to hold down the line, and then transferring that, and so there are things that can be sort of retro, but I realize that I think actually works as sort of a time capsule. And then later when Jennifer's talking about, yeah, with Twitter now you can do anything today, and then you guys are probably thinking, well, duh, yeah, that's been around for a long time, but this was filmed in, like, in 2010, 2011, 2012, where Twitter they just started coming out, and being able to tweet something that could be seen by millions of people. That's something that was just it was a new thing at that time. And so, yeah, it's interesting what Paul's talking about, how yeah, things don't age well in this Me Too age. It's sort of a good thing, maybe, not to better than the white guy anymore, because things are changing and times are changing, which is a good thing. And there's a lot more justice and that's happening, and a lot more awareness is happening this past few years. And so, yeah, so this story it is sort of a time capsule about that idea of things like that. And so yeah, so it's to me, it's not something that's modern. It's something that took place 20 years ago, and then took place 10 years ago. And so so I think that just the dialogue, like everything sort of works in terms of that particular time and time frame in that time capsule.
All right, listen, I have a few more questions
Sure.
for Jay. I'm going to ask him one more question. So, and this will give you a chance both to listen to the great question and Jay's answer, but also think of any questions you might have. If you don't have any questions, don't worry. I have many more questions to ask Jay. So, but let me just ask Jay this question, and then after Jay's answer, if any of you have questions, by all means, just raise your hand, and Jay and/or I will answer them. So here's the not the last question, but maybe the last question for this segment of our interview. You, the class, don't know this, but the original 2002 version of the Chronology Protection Case movie was in color. And as you know, it was shorter. It didn't have that extended ending. And as you also now know, it ended with, after Phil and Jennifer having this profound conversation, they just kiss each other. And that's pretty much the end of the movie. And then it was extended to show what they were like 10 years later, which, by the way, Jay and I both thought was incredibly cool, because Jay and Jennifer, the human beings, Phil and who is the actress?
Kate McGrew.
Kate McGrew, right. I was
Who
going
is
to say,
probably one of my oldest friends. I've known
yeah,
her
yeah.
35 years. Yeah, like all the people in the film, like Evan, Michelle Franco, are all really good friends. They're people I've known for decades. And yeah, because when you make films, you get your friends, and then you get them for later stuff as well. And so, yeah, so just Kate's doing great, and she and her dog are doing well. But yeah, that's Kate McGrew. She acted a lot. She was an actress, the stage actress.
Well, and you can see, by the way, that you and Kate knew each other prior to making this movie, because that's why, as later your wife, or even in that conversation where you're meeting for the first time in that little coffee shop, but you right away feel a connection to each other. And I thought you and Kate brought that across for Jay and Jennifer very well. And obviously, it's because you already, as human beings, actor and actress, did have that connection.
It's interesting you'd say that, because Kate and I, what we've done for decades is go to coffee shops and have conversations about philosophy and the world that lasted for hours and hours and hours. So yeah, and we've had a really good connection with each other. And yeah, I'm glad that showed in the film that, okay, it looks like these two people actually know each other, and so yeah, I'm glad that actually showed a little bit in the film.
It did. But here's my question. What,
Sure.
so why, how did that color original turn into a black and white grainy?
Okay, that's a good point. Many things um, that many things that are done decades ago become timeless. Art Deco is great. Other things like huge shoulder pads in the 80s aren't so great. They don't become timeless, and they sort of match you to that sort of decade. Well, I did this film, since it was 2000. I filmed it on high 8 video, not even digital video, high 8 analog videotape, and so it was the colors were very sort of faded in video. The frame rate was 30 frames a second, and so what this film originally screamed out was video. And video psychologically is considered a lesser medium, like a soap opera or something like that. And so when the film started becoming, people started getting interested in it, Paul started to get interested in it, I realized that, well, if I'm going to show this to like a bunch of people, I want to change it. I want to make this something, make it a little bit more timeless. And so what I realized that, as a test is let's see what happens if I just convert it to black and white, because some of the greatest films in the world, Citizen Kane, they've all been black and white films, and you can take color out of something, and what happens when you take the color out of something is you start to focus on the basics, on more fundamentals, the eyes of a person's face, the direction of a story. And so converting to black and white, and then also doing some things like taking the the 3:4 ratio and make it more of an HD sort of film ratio, as you can see right now on these screens. It's interesting, like what the Zoom call right now that we're doing, if you look at the squares that everyone is in, they're not 3/4. They're not TV squares, like old TV squares. They're like this. They're HD, even though the medium we're using, which is a person's face, would probably look better on a shorter screen. We could actually fit more people, in a shorter screen, but it's not. HD is what everyone does now, and so it's actually like this. And so even Zoom does it. Even Zoom knows there's a psychological thing about having an HD screen of this ratio. I think like 17:9 or something like that. 17:10. I forget the exact formula. But so basically I convert to that. I made it black and white. And then the final thing I did is I actually took the frame rate down from 30 down to about 20 frames a second, and to sort of make it look like it was filmed, with an actual old 16 millimeter camera. And it's interesting. I just a by note. A long time ago, John Dykstra, who did the visual effects for Star Wars. This is when there was no digital. This was still, everything was on film, 35 millimeter film. John Dykstra, he had a great idea. He was going to advance film, so it wasn't going to be 24 frames a second and 35 millimeter anymore. He's going to come out with this new format. It's basically 70 millimeters and 60 frames a second. So it was going to be twice as many frames a second, and it was 70 millimeter. And they made a few short films, and they projected it on this big screen with this big expensive camera, really expensive film. And everyone looked at it and they said, that looks like video. That looks cheap. It looks like it's you're filming a multi-camera sitcom or something like that, even though there was about 8 times as much information that was being shown and displayed on the screen. There's a psychological thing. People look at 24 frames a second as some sort of issue with quality. Even right now, in your iPhones, you can display something at a high frame rate as you want. You get 120 frames a second, but for some reason, 24 frames a second is this sort of psychological thing that people associate with film and associate with things that are more expensive and associate with quality. And so I converted to 24 frames. And as soon as I did that, all the video cheesiness that was sort of inherent in this sort of this high video sort of went away. And it looks like, even though the resolution is really low, the sort of the analog black and whites and the slower frame rate, to me, that sort of conveyed more of a timelessness. It actually, it, it, it it disguised the exact years where this film was made. It's like, well, this could have been made in, like, in the 70s, could have been made in the 80s. We don't know when this film was made. And so it's just interesting how Peter Jackson, the Lord of the Rings and on the Hobbit, he tried to film the Hobbit on 60 frames a second, and the theaters were like, no thanks, we want 20 frames a second. It just looks too much like video. And so even today, there, a lot of these directors are trying to do that, trying to convey more information. It just doesn't work. For some reason, 24 frames a second is going to be around for a while, until maybe you guys change it. But it's been tried every few decades. Like, someone tries it, and like the public goes, no, it's not that. So anyways, that's what it is. So I converted it to that sort of like black and white HD, letterbox, the 24 frames a second sort of format. And yeah, I just think it looks a lot better. I wish there is on YouTube some clips of the old video, 30 frames a second tape video, and it just, you're focusing so much on the video. You're so focusing on like, oh, this is just like someone that filmed this with a high video, and it takes away from the story. And so from then on, all my films, the next 3 or 4 films, that I actually filmed on videotape and digital video, have been converted to black and white and sort of letterbox. Now I actually have a Blackmagic digital, pocket cinema camera, and so I actually don't need to do that anymore. That's filming 24 frames a second. But yeah, because the fact that these films are decades old, yeah, having to do that conversion was something that was very interesting. I had to do it, and yeah, so I think it actually helped the film when I did that, even though it took away a whole bunch of information. It just seemed, people's expressions seemed to pop out more, and so yeah, so that was my story and my conversion.
All right, good. Well, so a couple of quick things. One, you were mentioning the difference between it looks like video, it looks like film. For a while, I think it was like back in the 1980s, maybe into the 1990s, and I'm not sure if any of the students have seen this, but for some reason in England, they adopted this almost like protocol of the indoor films the indoor parts of the action are shot in video, and the outdoor shot in film. So, in fact, Monty Python, the famous, group of comedians, they actually made fun of this, where they start off indoors, and and then they walk outside, and suddenly it's a different format. And someone say, "Oh my God, it's film! We're in film now." But that's how you wonder what was going on in those British heads, because it clearly looked very different.
Yeah, well, that's because when you get to a studio set, what's great about filming something on a set is there's no wind, there's no people, there's no crowd noise and stuff like that. And the trouble is, so you have this really nice set, but so you can control everything. But in that time, the cameras were so huge, you had to sort of like roll them around on these huge tripods, and they were like little refrigerators, pointing at people, and so but they were actually a lot more controllable, and they were also cheaper than film. Film cost money. You're actually burning celluloid and the chemicals and stuff like that. So being able to do something with a video is actually cheaper. But yes, once you go outside, they couldn't take these huge refrigerator cameras outside, so they had to use the usually 16 millimeter film cameras. And so, yeah, if you watch, I don't know if you watch the old, Doctor Who, Tom Baker era shows, where every time you're outside, it's like, wow, the cinematography is pretty good, and the inside, like, oh, it looks like a soap opera again. And yeah, a lot of like old 70s or 80s sitcoms, especially British sitcoms, it's what they did, is because of what they were able to, they were just saving money. And interesting, we were talking about British TV. British TV came out after American TV, and they sort of improved everything. Like American TV was like 400 lines of resolution, and British TV was almost like 500 lines of resolution. So even the video was actually is a little bit clearer. If you ever, I remember going to England and looking at the TVs and like, why is everything just a little more clearer than American television? So it was like that. But now there's like a standard for everything. The HD standard. And now there's like the 4K standard. So that's sort of gone away. But it's just in the earlier decades, you had all these where people were sort of just like figuring things out. there was all these different formats and all these different, things with film and video, and they were just trying to, piece things together. And so, yeah, so that was one of the funny things with like film and video, which goes back to why I took my video, I made it look like film, even though that got rid of a lot of information, because I just knew that was sort of a psychological idea about better quality.
But and the net result of that is there's no doubt, and Jay and I were talking about this earlier, that the revised movie with the extended ending probably looks at its best when it's on a phone, because everything is compressed on a phone. When it's up on
Yes.
a bigger screen, that's when it looks grainy. One of the things I mentioned to Jay, when the new version of the movie came out, I put up a link to it on a Goodreads time travel site, and one of the moderators said, "Oh my God, what is this? This is terrible. Everything looks so blurry." So I said, "Hey, get with it." I basically gave him the lame answer. Well, the universe doesn't really want you to see what's going on in the movie. So, get
Good
with the
answer.
story. Yeah, I
Yeah,
thought
I
that.
meant to do that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Why it's so shaky? It wasn't because we didn't have any tripods, because I wanted to convey the nervousness and anxiety of the scene. Yeah, yeah. And so yeah, you can, but yeah, it's funny because I just recently, oh no, I have to be interviewed. I better go watch my film again and read the story again. I watched my film again. I watched it on my phone, and I'm looking at it's like, the resolution isn't as bad as I thought it was, and realizing, oh yeah, I'm watching it on a phone. I'm not projecting it on a big screen, for, 100 people to see. And so, yeah, and people watch a lot of things on the phones right now. And this is definitely the type of movie that, as opposed to Lawrence of Arabia or some big budget action flick, this is it's something that you can definitely watch on the phone. It's funny, one of the reasons the American version of The Office got so popular is uh, uh, because the fact that it was one of the very first TV shows that a lot of people were watching on their phones. And the type of show it wasn't any action scenes. It was basically just a bunch of people, a bunch of talking heads back and forth. It worked really well on the phone. And so it was a type of show that people could see on their phones. And so it was because of that. That's one of the other reasons that, other than such a very good show, pretty good show. The American Office sort of grew in popularity because of that. It was one of the first shows that actually, that millions of people would just watch on the phones instead, or while they're like doing the dishes or something like that, and they would just have a little laptop there, and watch it there. It sort of worked that way. So it's interesting how a lot of our screens now are getting smaller. We don't have the big cinema scope, especially in the past year and a half, obviously. But yeah, but people are watching things on TVs, they're watching things on phones or laptops and stuff. And so, and at the same time, ironically, the resolution of film keeps going up. Like right now we're at 8K. You have 8K TVs, 8K films, and that, which is basically the limitation of what your eyes can see. You can't really, there's no reason to go any more than 8K because your eyes actually can't perceive anything more than that. But yeah, just interesting how like people are watching things on smaller devices, and even though the resolution is getting higher and higher. So yeah, it's
That,
very pretty.
yeah, that's a very good point. And by the way, that's a classic example of what Marshall McLuhan was talking about when he said the medium is the message, because you have the exact same movie, and it's a very different experience seeing it on a big screen in a theater, which that happened very few times. I think the original Chronology Protection Case, we screened it at a couple of science fiction conventions, and it was up on a pretty big screen, but
Mhm.
that was before Jay converted it to more grainy black and white. But it's a very different experience seeing it that way, seeing it on a television screen, seeing it on a laptop, and seeing it on your phone. And even though it's the same exact thing that you're seeing. But we have about another half hour left. And there are other things I want Jay to talk about, such as what he's working on now, some new things. But I do want to give all of you a chance to ask Jay questions and/or me questions about this. So
Do you have any questions?
they take a few minutes. There you go, Nemo.
Okay.
So I had a
Oh,
couple, but I think
sure.
I'll
Go ahead.
start I'll start
Mhm.
with one. My first question was, it kind of pertains to both of you, I guess, because like one evokes the character and one created the character, right? Um, but it was interesting to me that our main character was put at like the central plot of this, you know, like impossible physics scheme, and he was just a hobbyist in physics. Like obviously he had studied it and he had general knowledge and maybe a little bit more than general knowledge, but he wasn't a physicist, he was a forensic scientist. And then the other the I don't want to I hate that this is an unfortunate thing to, but like that both of the damsels in distress, right, they were both accomplished physicists in their respective fields, and yet they were kind of coming to, you know, this forensic scientist who was a hobbyist for advice and like guidance. And you know, he basically like he wanted to help Lauren out, and she was like explaining to him and he was like understanding it. And then presumably she figured it out before she passed away, right? But he was still kind of like on the fence about it. And then with Jennifer, even like he's instructing her at the cafe, which is probably why I don't remember the conversation as profound as it should have been, because it felt like he was just telling her what to do rather than like them arriving at the conclusions together. And it just didn't, that particular aspect, just I was just wondering how you guys work that dynamic in, where like, I mean, the poor
Yes, yeah, I totally understand what you're saying. You're right. And what you're bringing to light, which is what has happened in the past few years, is how things are changing and what priorities were. And you were bringing in the idea that yes, even though there were a lot of women in the story and in the film, what we are often guilty of as men is basically putting ourselves in as the protagonists, putting ourselves as the most important people, and not realizing that maybe there could be something different. We could have a different way of showing something, of putting maybe someone else in the center. And yeah, and you're absolutely right. You're talking about things that are timeless. You know, basically the you know, transferring of the you know, Lauren, Helen transferring the phone call and stuff like that. Another thing that actually is dated as well is the ideas and the stereotypes and basically ideas of the roles of men and the roles of women in this film and in my film and you know, in the story. And you know, in the past 3 years, it's which has been a great thing, is we're starting to see that. We're starting to see what the mistakes were. I'm starting to see how things can be changed, and it's great. And looking back at my earlier film and looking back at things like this, I realized that you know, how many of these films pass the Bechdel test? You know, are you familiar with the Bechdel test? Yeah, and how you know, after this film, I actually made a vow to say, okay, every one of my films is gonna pass the Bechdel test. You know, it's gonna be like there's going to be at least 2 women in talking about something that is not a man. And so yeah, and we learn and we change. And one of the biggest ways to change is to have people who are not men, not white males, actually make media. Jolie Soloway, who did Transparent, they came out with a manifesto. I'm sort of paraphrasing it, like, you know, a really amazing thing that would sort of make a lot of changes would be is that for the next 50 years, no media, songs, no TV shows, no stories would be written by men or white men. It would be basically everyone else, and there would be a 50-year moratorium on anything written by men. And even though that's probably not going to happen, it would actually work. That would actually change everything, and that would actually, you know, change the whole idea about who could write stories. And so yeah, so Nima, what you're saying is true. That what we're seeing in these films, especially a film that's like a story that's 20 years old and a film that's 10 years old, is we are seeing the limitations and the issues that we had with what we thought was important, what we thought who the important characters were. It's interesting. I just saw, I don't know if you ever saw, ever see Stealth, this really sort of slightly crappy movie about a fighter jet that goes AI, and it's interesting. I just saw it came out like 10 years ago or something like that. But the most dynamic character is Jamie Foxx, and who is, you know, a black person, and he dies like, a third of the way through the film to show how awful this AI was. And the main character was this sort of a generic white guy. I forget what his name was, but it's just, and you realize like, wait a second, why did Jamie Foxx die? Oh yeah, this film's 10 years old. And they have this priority about who's supposed to be the lead, these stereotypes about who is supposed to be the main character. And for such a long time, the main character was white and male. And if you're going to spend $100 million making a big action film, the producers are going to say, no, we need someone who was white and male as the main character. And what's great is it's starting to change, and people like you're asking these questions and not accepting them. And so yes, everything you're saying is correct. And even though the underlying themes of people figuring out what's going on, and dealing with mind-bending realities and trying to figure out what's going on, even those themes are the same, perhaps the people trying to figure out those solutions need to be different. And does that answer the question a little bit, or is that?
I
Well,
think
that was
yeah. Let me just, well, go ahead, Nima, why don't you respond, then I have a response to what Jay said.
no, I was just gonna say mostly that was the preface to my question, which was I was gonna
Okay.
ask if it were to be remade or like rewritten now, or if it were to be adapted in a modern, because I remember Professor Levinson, you said in our last class that you wanted to do eventually a stage adaptation, right? And it just got me thinking, like, would we have the same roles assigned to the same genders, or like have the same tropes assigned in our modern society? So you absolutely brought up some of that, Mr. Kessinger, but that was my main question. So like that was mostly like I'm sorry if it sounded like critique, but like mostly my observation of the gender roles was me asking if that would change, or if that's something that's central to the story.
Well, those are good. Yeah, those
Yeah.
are good questions. Let me just respond, then I'd be interested in what Jay has to say. I mean, I agree with everything Jay said, but I just want to make a couple of other points. The reason that Phil is sort of in the driver's seat in the story, both in the story and the movie, and this is in response to what Nemo first said, Phil is not a physicist. He's a forensic scientist. He's therefore an expert in death and what causes death. And that's really the whole motive of the story. Why are these scientists dying? So Laura contacts him because her husband has died, and she's beginning to figure out what's going on. And as soon as she figures out what's really happening, she dies. Then the other scientists, one by one, begin dying. And then it's just down to Jennifer. In that last desperate conversation between Phil and Jennifer, Phil is prodding Jennifer to come up with a way of dealing with this, because Phil, as an expert in death, has at least figured out that insofar as he's able to understand what's going on, they're both going to die because they know too much, and this vindictive universe is going to kill them. So I think that that really, at least was my answer, as why did I set up a situation in which you have two highly intelligent women physicists, and the guy who's just a forensic detective seems to be instructing them. He's not instructing them in physics. He's instructing them in life and death matters. Of course, that's totally fictitious. My guess is there's no forensic detective on the face of the earth who would understand, what Phil is supposed to be able to understand. The second point, though, I would make, and this is an interesting question, and I honestly don't know what the answer is to it. There's an old, and again, it's a cliche because it's probably very true, that it's advice that's given to writers, and I would give this to you as writers: write about what you know best. So if you're a white guy and you're writing a story, obviously you know that aspect best because you've seen the world through that. And my two best known novels, one is The Silk Code, which is a Phil D'Amato novel. The other is The Plot to Save Socrates, in which I deliberately made the protagonist a woman, Sierra Waters, who's a graduate student in 2042. And I really had to work hard at making her believable, because I don't see the world the way a woman sees the world. And, you know, for all I know, I didn't do a good job. I mean, before I showed it to my editor, the late David Hartwell, my wife and daughter read it, and I asked them to be honest with me. And they told me a couple of things where, no, listen, she's taking a misstep here. And so I tried to correct that. But it's not an easy thing to do. And I wouldn't want to go so far as to say, hey, um, if you're a white guy, don't ever make a black guy a protagonist because you won't know what he is feeling, or don't ever write about a woman. I think it's good for people to try to stretch beyond. But I think that the important thing of what Nemo and Jay are saying is you have to try not to take the easy way out. And final answer to Nemo here. Yes, I would like to make this into a play. Who knows? Maybe I'll ask Jay to help me. I don't know. We'll see. But there's no doubt that if I were to write a play, I want to put this on some stage in 2022, 2023, it would have to be slightly to somewhat different in various ways. By the way, let me just say one last point. In the original story, I don't know if you remember, the police officer who basically comes to Laura's place after she's died is a woman. Jay made that a man because he had an old friend who was a police officer. That's a real police officer. He wanted to show him walking up there. And I thought that was a good move for the film. But
It was, and yeah, and I couldn't, you know, I was at UCSC. There were no female police officers, so that's the thing.
Right.
That was something where I need a police officer, and yeah, well, okay, I have to have a police officer. So you know, yeah, yes, and that's exposes the limitations in the real world that actually makes it more of a challenge to sort of match some characters.
Yeah. All right. So Nemo, do we answer your question pretty much?
Mhm.
Thank you. Who else has a question? All right, Charlie.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I mean, I think you directed and produced and starred in the movie. So I guess just like what's that process like directing yourself and other people at the same time, and then also setting up camera shots and things like that.
Yes. Okay. Sometimes it looks ridiculous because you basically have your own camera, and sometimes it was a one-man crew. I would go out and I would actually set up the camera. I would look at where I was and film it. Say, okay, I'm right here, and actually do a dialogue. I would hit record, go over and do a dialogue, and then come back and turn off the camera. But in terms of yeah, so it's just logistically, which is what probably, if you're making a film, the most important thing is logistics, how you actually do something as opposed to strategy and you know, and composition and stuff like that, if you actually want to complete a film. But yeah, in terms of the fact that doing all of it, I had to sort of I had to become three people. One of my jokes is when I write, like, say, my own screenplay, and I film it, I actually tell the crew, okay, look, the person who wrote this screenplay, what an asshole. He's actually on vacation now in Bali, and we don't even know where he is. So what we're going to do is we're just going to take this crappy dialogue, whatever he wrote, and we're going to basically make our film and see how we can find some sort of interpretation from this. I actually sort of, I think of myself, the screenwriter, as the director, as two different people. And that actually seems to work because you actually find some insights that you know, the screenplay. I'm not talking about Phil's story, which is Meg. I'm talking about my screenplay. But yeah, and you find some insights of the screenplay. Oh, okay, that's interesting. The screenwriter, as we call him, even though it's me, the screenwriter, you know, wrote this way. Oh, so let's interpret it this way. Let's see how let's film it this way. Let's direct it this way. And so a lot of a really good way is to sort of like separate yourself, consider yourself as two different people. And same thing with like the acting. Okay, so the director is going to give this information. So now I'm the actor. Okay, here are my motivations. I have to get this person to do something. And you go back to like the Stanislavski method of acting. What's great is there are tools, and there are books, and there's education for all these things, for screenwriting and directing and acting, where actually you don't need a person actually telling you what to do at that moment. You can actually go back to your own knowledge. And so yeah, so basically I got as the director, I said, so you're going to go here, you're going to do this, you're going to convey this. At the end of the scene, you want this. This needs to happen to this person. And then as the actor, I'd say, okay, that's my instruction. Now I'm going to interpret it as the actor. Okay, so, well, this person, I need to, what's the action verb for this? So I need to impress, cajole, what action verb do I use? And you score your lines, every beat, and you sort of do it that way, and you sort of ignore what the director does. The same way the director ignores the actual persona of who the screenplay is. So it's just, it's like there's three different people, only the three different people are all you. And so is that a okay answer? Yeah, just you make the separation, and sometimes it's good to sort of make fun of the other person. This screenwriter is an asshole. Oh, the director doesn't know what the hell he's doing. Here's how I'm going to do it. And so by sort of becoming, sort of sibling yourself and becoming like three different personalities, that seems to make things go a lot more efficiently.
That was a great question and a great answer. I'll just throw in here, I think there's a connection between what Jay is talking about, what Charlie asked, and if you are a songwriter and then you go into a recording studio and you produce and sing or play on whatever it is that you wrote. Because in what Jay was saying, I've experienced the same thing in that context. So in other words, as a songwriter, I write a certain lyric, but when I go into the studio and actually sing it, and there are other people playing instruments, I can sometimes feel, hey, you love that lyric, that's why you put it in. But you know what? It worked when you were just singing it, but when you have a whole bunch of other people playing, and the drummer's coming in at this point, and you want like a little piano flourish and some guitar licks, that lyric is actually getting in the way of your production. So when I recorded my most recent album, Welcome Up, back in 2018, I actually changed lyrics when I was singing in the studio for that very reason. Sometimes I changed the lyric because I came up with a better lyric, a better word. Like in one place, I changed birds fly to crows fly, because crow is just more descriptive. But birds and crows, they scan exactly the same. Other times I changed it because I could just see that the original lyrics were not going to quite work as well. The other thing I'll just mention is some of the greatest filmmakers in history did all that, namely like Charlie Chaplin. He wrote, he produced, and starred in his movies. But it's not an easy thing to do.
But I'll just, one of my favorite quotes in music ever is from Thurston Moore, who was in Sonic Youth. He said, once the music leaves your head, it's already compromised. So it's, you have this song in your head, it's going to change. It's going to completely change by yourself, by the people who are playing it. So rewriting, like Michener, James Michener, who this famous author, he said that he was a terrible writer, even though he was a amazing writer, but he's a terrible writer, but he thought he was one of the world's greatest rewriters. And so a lot of what you do with writing is basically changing it and rewriting it, and basically taking all your ideas and consolidating them, and 90% of what you're going to think and what you're going to of your storage ideas is going to be crap. It's that 10% that you want to sort of, that is golden. That's the one you want to sort of like write down. So if you think that stereotype of that person in the coffee shop with the old 1940s Corona, tack, 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 typing the screenplay, I always thought that was silly. That person shouldn't be writing it. That person better be consolidating all the ideas that he wrote in his little notebook that he carries, or that she carries with him for like, around everywhere, and then consolidate that into one, into like, some ideas that's what he or she better be typing. So basically it's all about rewriting. It's all about, you don't know what you're going to get at the end. But just, make sure that you have a lot of ideas, and just keep doing it that way.
As long as the coffee shop is Perks, it'll come out okay.
Perks, unfortunately, as so many things, unfortunately, is no more. It finally closed down. Even pre-pandemic, a lot of things, closed down. But it was good to be able to sort of put Pergs on film, just so immortalize it, because it's gone. It's not there anymore. It's too bad, because it was a pretty cool coffee shop.
I mean, Jay's movie is so effective. You can smell the coffee in that last scene. At least I can when the two of them are there. It always gets me in the mood for a cup of coffee.
It was really hard making it so that when people were drinking coffee and we're doing the dialogue to make sure that the levels of the coffee were the same, that they were, okay, taking a sip, but go, because we've seen some films, you see like someone's drinking coffee and like, yeah, let me tell you something. And then it cuts back to the person and suddenly the coffee is higher. It's like all these different levels, all these things like continuity is really, really important in filmmaking. So that's why if you're drinking coffee, it's best to use a mug and not like a transparent glass. So
I'm not knowing Jay, in addition to being the screenwriter, the lead actor, the producer, the director, Jay, I think, was also his own continuity person in this film.
yes, and it
So aware.
shows in some
No,
cases.
it's good continuity.
Mhm.
All right, that was go ahead, Jay.
Yeah, yes. If you see one scene, I realized, my beard, because there was one shot where I had to Donovan, like, and don't do anything about this story. And I realized, oh my God, my beard's like a lot shorter because I filmed this like 2 days. I filmed this after I shaved, like 3 days after, because I forgot to put that in. And so things like that, and then if you get a continuity director there's a person whose job is to make sure that doesn't happen. It's just funny, even in $100 million films, you see these things where like, oh, this person's color is like this, and then the next scene that's down like this, it's like that. And so yeah, like hair, that's why everyone's hair in film has just so much spray stuff on it. Like you don't want wavy hair because it's always going to be different. Like the latest film I did, Adrian, one of the characters, she had long hair, and then you just kept having to realize, oh darn it, okay, this last scene, was your hair and behind you, was in front of you, was one behind you, one back. We realized there was all these different scenes. We had to sort of match how her hair was when we actually went back and filmed some things. So things like that. That's continuity. It's logistics. That's the big hardest part of the film, I believe, even more than strategy or direction.
Jay, since we don't have that much time left, and we'll probably have time maybe for another question or two, but why don't you talk now, because you mentioned your latest film. Tell us what you're doing right now.
It's basically this film. It's the control idea is it's about two women who are tasked with stopping this guy who's committing a series of catastrophes. It goes into multiple universes, and their plans are sort of complicated by the arrival of this young woman. It explores these issues of toxic masculinity and the use of words as weapons. And the controlling idea is that enough smaller people can sort of like rise up to defeat a greater evil. And a more, I think, controversial idea is sometimes evil can't be reasoned with. Sometimes you actually just have to, beat it down. And so, so it's a film I'm working for the past year and a half, and it's I don't want to talk about too much. I want to talk about full stuff, but yeah, it was really fun to make, and it's like my 7th film. One of the things that I'm really happy about is that I've planned, storyboarded, written 7 films, and I've completed 7 films, and some of those films have gone on to result in Edgar nominations. Other films have been in film festivals, like all over the place. Other films have just went on into obscurity. You never know what's going to happen, but I'm very happy that I've actually been able to make, whenever I make a film, at a year or 2 later, the film is done. So that's actually, I'm proud of my track record there. Doesn't mean it's a great film, but it is a completed film. And so this last film I'm really happy about, because I think I'm sort of putting together all the things I've learned from my previous 6 films. And so if you go to modvec, modvec.com, and you'll just see sort of like, if you scroll down, I blog every few months, what I've been doing, and have pictures of all the crew, the dialogue, and yeah, people always have a really great time, and just have scenes of the film. And there's actually some clips I've done with just about everything. I just need to add the final music. I have to write the music. Right now there's a bunch of placeholder music by like a bunch of famous, a bunch of like like turn of the century musicians like Lily Boulanger and Satie and Debussy, and so I'm sort of just going to replace that with my actual music that I've written. And so, but yeah, that's the last part, and so it's pretty much almost done. And so yeah, so I've been working on that for about the past year and a half, and yeah, and my goal is just to keep making films and just keep improving them. And if you go to the website, one of the taglines of my that of Modvet Films is story, character with occasional visual effects, because I'm always going to be a sci-fi nerd. I'm always going to want to put like really cool sci-fi elements in. This latest film has a bunch of hollow screens, and it was sort of fun putting that stuff up there, and a bunch of like sort of like like beams and stuff, and it was fun. It's always fun doing visual effects, post-production, stuff like that, but I'm always also trying to sort of convey like the story and convey like the characters, and making sure there's a lot of time rehearsing and working on motivations and working on action verbs and what the dialogue should be. So yeah, it's fun. Making films is really fun, and I'll keep doing it. And every film I make, something happens to it or nothing happens to it. And the main thing is just to keep enjoying it, and just to try to keep improving this craft, and adding things that you think will make things better.
Well, let me just say, apropos the Edgar nomination, just to unpack that a little bit. I think I may have mentioned this to the class on Tuesday. The life of the Chronology Protection Case seems to go on and on. So basically, I write this story. It's nominated for a Nebula Award. It's a finalist, doesn't win. Reprinted in a bunch of places. Jay sees it, makes it into his movie, The Chronology Protection Case. That's shown at a couple of science fiction conventions. This is before even YouTube. And then someone, and you're going to like this as a class, who was a student of mine at Fordham University, who's now actually a professor. So you may or may not have taken a course with him, and I would recommend that you do if you have a chance to. His name is Mark Shanahan. He is actually an actor. He's a voice actor. He's just a full-fledged actor. And so he basically sees Jay's movie, reads my story, and says, you know what, I'm going to make a radio play from this, because he was into radio plays then. And he makes this radio play. And I'll see, there's a version you can get of that play from Audible. I may have a free version of it somewhere. I'll see if I can get that to you. But that's yet a third take, because what Mark Shanahan did is he read my story, saw Jay's movie, and then did something yet a tiny bit different. And so that radio play is what was nominated for the Edgar Award, which is for the best mystery radio play of that year. Again, nominated, but not winning.
But it was really cool being able to fly to New York to go to the Edgar Awards, hosted by Jerry Orbach, and it was actually really cool. I sat at a table with a bunch of like other nominees and stuff, and so yeah, it was a really, really cool thing. And and at the very end, I want to say one final thing about something, but go ahead. There's other stuff.
No, go ahead. You
okay. Well, okay. I'll say right now. I think it's sort of like a bookend. What I said at the beginning. The whole reason you're talking about the journey of the Chronology Protection Case, the reason that this journey happened was because of Paul's kindness, because of the decisions he made at the very beginning when he got this movie of his story. Instead of saying, hey, this is my story, what right do you have to make a movie about it, I'm going to sue you, something like that, he decided, let's see what we can do with this. This is kind of, I like this, let's see how far we can go with it. And by doing that, and by again, his criticism of me of being a little too modest about my stuff and not sending it out, that shows evidence that he was right, that he sent it out there and he pushed it out to all these places. And and as a result, I get a call a few months later or whatever saying, from Paul, hey, guess what? We got Edgar nominations for best play. Like, what? Oh yes, Mark Shanahan turned it into a play, and so he got an Edgar nomination since he used obviously my stuff in your film. Then we all are included in that, and so it's because of the fact that You chose kindness, and you chose basically that Paul sort of like decided to be generous, decided, let's see what we can do with this. This is awesome. He found the awesome in it, and not not any bitterness, or not any sort of like greed about, you know, what it was, what he thought might have been taken from him by some young upstart at the time, making this film. And so, and it's a lesson, and it goes back to kindness, goes back to just giving people the benefit of the doubt, giving people you know, being generous and actually helping people. And when you do that, when you spread stuff out, you know, who knows where it'll take you. And so, and with the chronology protection case, it's taken us, you know, a lot of really great places.
Oh,
So thank
thank
you,
you.
Paul.
Oh, you're very welcome, Jay, and thank you for saying that. And I should mention my father was a lawyer, and one of the things I learned from my father is life isn't just about what rights you have in a legal sense. Uh, Basically, life is about being, you know, a decent person and understanding if something happens and you don't expect it to happen, and it's a surprise. You don't just jump and say, "Hey, that's mine. You had no right to do that." No, you try to take it in and understand what was the intention of the person who did this, what was the result of what he did. And uh, my initial feeling as soon as I saw the first minute or two of this movie, and this little boy, you know, running down the steps with that rinky-dink music, is this was something good and worthwhile. And you know, here we are. It's June 7th, 4:28 p.m. in the year 2021. And you know, literally 19 to 20 years after I first, you know, saw what Jay did. And this is one of the benefits of what Jay did and the way Jay and I worked on this afterwards. So listen, I want to thank Jay very much. This was a real pleasure. I want to thank all of you as students. Just to give you some brief, so Jay can hear in like a minute how I conduct a class. What you should be working on in the next week are your own projects, because again, there's going to be a midterm in which you're going to be presenting either the horizontal or vertical version of your projects, as I mentioned last time, and then of course the final. And I want you to continue watching The Man in the High Castle, because again, we're going to have an interview with Rufus Sewell at the end of July. But I have to say that Jay has really set a high bar for Rufus Sewell, because this was really a great interview. We covered everything we wanted to.
I told Paul I was honored to be your practice guy, you know, until you actually got you got something really important. But yeah, but it was really fun to be a part of this, and yeah, I hope I conveyed some information that you guys all of you will take away. And yeah, so just, yeah, thanks for having me.